Hi, it's Katrina. War Club in the backyard. Mark Lake was clearing up his backyard after a storm hit his small seaside village on Vancouver Island in Canada. As he was cleaning up the debris, he came across a strange-looking stick jutting out from the base of a maple tree. The stick was a thick piece of wood that appeared to have been worked very carefully by a skilled craftsman. He picked it up and looked it over, and Mark realized he had stumbled upon a piece of history. As it turns out, he came across a rare Salish war club in his backyard. It was an artifact from the Comox First Nation people. This is an extremely rare artifact. Even the chief of the First Nation people, Nicole Rempel, called it pretty exciting. Nicole has been helping collect artifacts for her nation since 2013, yet has never seen a piece like this. But we don't know how old the artifact is yet. Because it has to go through the chiefs and a bit of Native American bureaucracy, archaeologists haven't even gotten involved yet. Only when archaeologists are called in to do proper analysis will we truly know how old the war club is. What we do know is that the Salish coast of Vancouver Island has been occupied by native tribes for over 10,000 years. The Salish people have lived in British Columbia and Washington almost since humans first stepped foot in North America. There are over 24 local languages spoken, but today there are only about 25,000 Salish people left. This war club was probably used by an ancient warrior for battle, but we don't know exactly when. Lost medieval empire. Archaeologists recently uncovered the remains of an ancient medieval empire in China. The discovery came in the southwest of the country, while researchers were excavating the ruins of the old capital of the Nanzhao Empire. They came across the remains of what they believed to be one of the biggest Buddhist monasteries in the world. When the archaeologists started excavating the remains of these monasteries, they came across some mysterious artifacts. The artifacts suggest the location was used as a burial ground for the most important rulers of the empire. The site consists of at least 14 major buildings. They were probably constructed around the empire's peak in the 9th century AD, but the dating hasn't been confirmed yet. What's interesting is that the Nanzhao Empire has mostly been forgotten, and so the find has come as a huge and very welcome surprise. They were a militarized imperial state that conquered huge parts of Vietnam, Myanmar, Thailand, Laos, and the western Chinese provinces of Guizhou and Sichuan. 1,000 years ago, the Nanzhao Empire was practically unstoppable. For several centuries, they held the balance between two of the other major powers in Asia at the time, mainland China and Tibet. Nanzhao originally came to power in the 7th century. At about the same time, militarization was increasing throughout Asia. By the year 800 AD, China had an army of about 600,000, and Nanzhao had a force of 100,000 elite warriors. What a lot of people don't know is that in medieval Asia, the armies were around 4 times larger than the armies in Europe. If not for the great distance between Asia and Europe would have been utterly decimated by war with the East. As for the Nanzhao, they were ultimately absorbed into China's larger sphere and forgotten. Not much remains of them today, except the few ruins in their old capital. Tree stump on Mars. Something pretty cool was recently spotted on Mars, what appears to be a giant tree stump filled with rings. The image of the mysterious tree stump was taken in June of 2021 by the ExoMars Trace Gas Orbiter. The orbiter is part of a joint mission involving a Russian space agency and the European Space Agency. The orbiter travels around Mars from above and collects data about the atmosphere and takes images of the red planet's surface. This new image is unique, looking like an enormous stump with concentric rings to mark every year of its age. But of course, there are no tree stumps on Mars. This is an impact crater that happens to be extremely rich in ice. The rings inside the crater don't tell its age, but rather show what's made the planet's structure throughout its history. Think of an impact crater kind of like an onion. When a piece of debris smashes into a planet, it carves out a chunk, like taking a bite out of an onion. This reveals all the little layers, which can show what kinds of changes happened throughout a large period. In this crater on Mars, scientists were able to identify rich deposits of ice from millions of years ago. Each layer shows a major climatic change, which scientists believe came because of Mars shifting its axis. Millions of years ago, Mars spun on its axis, very similar to how Earth spins today, but that's changed over time. And those changes, because they caused such environmental catastrophe, show up in craters' rings like the rings on a tree stump. An ancient newspaper. A man in Edinburgh, Scotland, discovered an amazing piece of history while sorting through his late grandmother's belongings. He found a 110-year-old newspaper, an original that was printed the day after the Titanic sank. It's not that ancient, but it's incredibly rare. According to Graham McCallum, he discovered the newspaper in a shoebox of all places, tucked away in the family home. He believes his grandmother must have purchased it while she was living in Newcastle back in 1912. She tucked the newspaper away, understanding its significance, and then everyone just kind of forgot about it. The shoebox was moved around with the family, but nobody ever looked to see what was in it. The paper was printed by the Daily Mirror, describing the horrible events of the unsinkable ship's demise. It has an estimated worth of over £6,000. But Graham has no intention of selling it and is going to keep it safe, hopefully for another 100 years, until his grandchildren find it for themselves. What would you do? Keep or sell? Let me know in the comments below. An ancient Peruvian temple. In Peru, a new megalithic temple has been discovered in Lambayeque, believed to have once been the site of mysterious fertility rituals. The discovery was made by the Peruvian archaeologist Walter Alva, the same guy who uncovered the tomb of the Lord of Sipan back in 1987. The temple was found at the Huaca El Toro site, along with 21 new tombs. So far, it's the only megalithic piece of architecture found in Lambayeque, and there isn't much left of it. The archaeologists came across a staircase buried underneath the dirt of a hill, along with the walls of the temple, which have been reduced to a straight line of loose rocks. If they hadn't dug beneath the surface of the hill, they would have never come across the ruins. Turns out the entire temple was buried. Archaeologists say this structure is at least 3,000 years old. The reason they know it was used in rituals is that they uncovered an altar, one similar to altars found in other temples used in fertility rituals throughout Peru. It's unclear who built it or why it was abandoned and left to be covered by thousands of years of shifting dirt. It appears to have been reused by later cultures like the Chimu, but the original architects are completely unknown. Secret underground ocean. A shocking discovery announced in early 2022 by scientists is about to blow your mind. Researchers have discovered the most compelling evidence yet that one of Saturn's moons is brimming with extraterrestrial life. The moon is called Mimas, but it's known as the Death Star in the scientific community because it looks suspiciously like Darth Vader's secret weapon in Star Wars. It even has a crater on one side that looks like the concave part of the Death Star. But of course, the moon has nothing to do with science fiction, and information recently sent back to Earth from NASA's Cassini probe suggests it has an entire world hiding under its surface. The probe spotted a bizarre wobble in the rotation of the moon, which has made scientists think there could be water hiding inside it. The wobble is quite possibly the result of a liquid ocean sloshing around underneath the icy surface of the moon as it goes around Saturn. This is groundbreaking because it means there could be life. And if there's an ocean of strange alien life under the surface of one of Saturn's moons, it means there are infinite sources of life out in the universe. Giant woolly mammoth tooth. A construction worker in Iowa just made the best discovery of his life. While he was working on a community college site, he accidentally dug up the enormous tooth of a woolly mammoth. His name is Justin Blowett, and he credits his 2 sons for his discovery. Because of his kids' love of dinosaurs, Justin said he was able to recognize that the object came from a prehistoric creature. The tooth is huge and takes 2 hands just to hold. It weighs over 11 pounds and is nearly a foot long, making it bigger and heavier than a human head. The tooth once belonged to one of the most well-understood prehistoric animals in the world. Because woolly mammoths roamed across the icy wastelands of Europe and North America up until 10,000 years ago, their skeletons are found in many places. But it's still rare that an ordinary person, when not even looking, can come across a fossilized tooth like this in such excellent condition. Although Justin was the one who discovered it, the tooth belongs to the college, which plans to donate it to the Sheldon Prairie Museum, where it will be put on display. Have you ever seen a mammoth tooth or a skeleton? Let me know in the comments below. A spooky face. The Hubble Space Telescope took one of the eeriest pictures in galactic history not too long ago. They took a snapshot of what appeared to be the face of some kind of alien titan. The optical illusion is the result of two galaxies colliding. Two huge yellow eyes like swirling galaxies, with the head framed in a blue nebula of space dust. The photograph resembles a face, and yet it isn't. It's a pair of galaxies colliding in a rarely photographed phenomenon. The reason it looks like a face is that the two colliding galaxies form its eyes, while the energy around them has formed itself into the shape of a human skull. Groupings of stars even seem to form a nose and mouth. So far, this is the only time anything similar to this has been captured in a picture. If you're wondering how a pair of galaxies can crash into each other, it's simple. Galaxies apparently frequently bump into one another, and often a bigger galaxy will swallow a smaller one if it gets too close. Nothing is anchored down in space, and everything is drifting at its own speed. These galaxies simply got too close, and the contact ripped them into a haze of gas, dust, and stars. The Egyptian Atlantis. Off the coast of Alexandria in Egypt, researchers discovered the country's very own version of Atlantis. It's the submerged world of Heraklion, plunged into the sea about 1,500 years ago. It was once a prosperous port city and one of the most important harbors in the entire Mediterranean. Now it's an underwater ruin. The city was first discovered in 2001 by a team of archaeologists led by expert Frank Gaudio. Frank had been looking for Napoleon's lost warships from the Battle of the Nile in 1798. Instead, he came across broken pillars, cracked statues, sunken obelisks, and dozens of other structures and pieces of architecture. Frank had stumbled upon a very real underwater city. Researchers have been able to piece together quite a bit of Heraklion's history in the past 20 years. It helps that excavations have never stopped. Just recently, Frank was at it again, pulling out another hoard of treasure. This time, they were statues of Egyptian gods. Archaeologists salvaged a massive statue of the Egyptian goddess Isis and a statue of the god Hapi, each 16 feet tall, and preserved in excellent condition because they had been stuck in the mud. They also found smaller statues of other gods. Researchers believe they were crafted to guard the temple in which Cleopatra was inaugurated when she became the Queen of the Nile. There is still a lot to be discovered here, and some people even believe that Cleopatra's lost tomb might be hidden somewhere beneath the waves. Mysterious jars. In India, 65 mysterious sandstone jars were just discovered by researchers with the ANU Northeastern Hill University and Gauhati University. The jars are similar to the ones that have been found in other Asian countries, such as Indonesia and Laos. You may have heard of the Plain of Jars before, the bizarre site in Laos where an unknown group of people buried hundreds of bodies in gigantic jars and left them strewn across a barren field. A strikingly similar site was just discovered half a world away in India. As of right now, archaeologists are stumped. The jars reach up to 10 feet tall, with some being partially buried, some are fully buried, and some are just sitting in the open. According to one of the team members, Nicholas Skopal, the jars were probably used by the Naga people, an ethnic group still living in northeast India, except they would have used them centuries ago, like large urns in long-lost burial rituals. Thanks for watching! Which of these fascinating discoveries surprised you the most? Hattusa. Hattusa can be found in the heart of Turkey's Anatolia region, the old capital of the Hittites. It dates all the way back to the Bronze Age around the year 2000 BC. If you've never heard of the Hittites, here's a quick recap. This was an ancient civilization and a powerful empire that stretched from the Aegean Sea in what is now Greece all across Anatolia and into northern Syria. They were such a legendary people that until Hattusa was discovered in 1834, archaeologists believed it was a myth. But as we now know, this was one of the largest and most important cities of the ancient world. It was surrounded by a massive wall. The city was divided into districts and fortified with over 100 towers and 5 main gateways. These gateways were decorated with giant statues of lions and sphinxes. Archaeologists have estimated the population of Hattusa reached a maximum of about 50,000 people, which was a lot back in those days. They built dwellings of wood and mud and brick and erected massive temples to their pagan gods. The Assyrians had even established a trading post in Hattusa and set up an Assyrian part of the city. This was not only a major hub for the Hittites, but also an international metropolis with visitors from all over the ancient world. Alas, none of these ancient civilizations lasted forever. By 1200 BC, Hattusa and the Hittites were lost in the Bronze Age collapse. The city was gradually abandoned over several decades, and the empire disintegrated. The city remained empty until 800 BC, when the Phrygians moved in and made it their own. McDermott's Castle. The mighty McDermott Castle in Ireland is quite a sight to behold. While it may get less attention than other sites like the Blarney Castle, for those who really want an interesting glimpse into history, as well as the opportunity to gaze upon a structure that really looks like it came out of a fairy tale, they visit McDermott Castle. What makes the castle unique is that it's built on an island. The castle sits in the middle of a lake, about a mile from the town of Boyle. The lake, called Lough Key, holds over 30 extremely small islands. It was the Mac Diarmada dynasty that supposedly built the castle in the 12th century, but the history behind it is a little obscure. What we do know is that sometime around 1184, a bolt of lightning struck the castle on the island and caused it to burst into flames. Dozens of people died in the blaze, and several people drowned trying to swim ashore. The castle was rebuilt after the incident with the lightning. It then came under siege in 1235. Cormac MacDermott, the king of Moylurg, was forced to surrender to Richard More de Burgh. More de Burgh had besieged the island castle with catapults mounted to rafts and small ships. After the invasion of the island, the castle fell into disrepair. The MacDermotts lost all control of it in 1586, and it slowly became the ruin it is today. The ancient city of Termessos. The ancient city of Termessos was founded by a group of Pamphylian tribes known as the Solimi. It was built near the top of the Taurus mountain range in Turkey, at an astounding height of over 3,000 feet above sea level. Construction began on a natural platform and gradually spread across the mountains until some parts of the city were over 4,500 feet tall. While the view may have been spectacular, there were some downsides to living on top of a mountain. For example, the only way to reach the city was to literally climb the mountain. But there were bonuses too. The fortified city was nestled within the mountains in such a way that attack was unthinkable. It was concealed by lush pine forests and endured for hundreds of years in peace. Today, it's one of the best preserved ancient cities anywhere in the country of Turkey. But we don't know the exact origins of the city. Legend says it was Bellerophon who founded Termessos, a monster slayer from Greek mythology who killed the evil Chimera. What we know from ancient texts is that the Solimi were the first people here. They were part of a cult dedicated to an Anatolian god who later came to be known as Zeus. Most of what we know about Termessos comes from much after its birth, when Alexander the Great pushed his way through the area in 333 BC. Alexander compared the city to an eagle's nest and ultimately failed to conquer it. This is the guy who defeated the Persians. Yet he could see how impossible it would be to march his army straight up a mountain and try to take a gigantic city hiding in the forest. But still, Termessos ended up being destroyed. Even though it escaped war and strife for centuries, avoiding ruin at the hands of Rome by allying with the empire, the city still crumbled. Over 150,000 people were displaced when an earthquake in the 5th century AD destroyed the aqueduct and cut off the water supply. Everybody went down the mountain, leaving the city to become a lost ruin. The Kami Ruins. The Kami Ruins are all that remain of a once great capital in southern Africa. I'm talking about the Kingdom of Butua, a group of people who built one of the greatest cities ancient Africa ever saw in what is now Zimbabwe. It was the capital for about 2 centuries, from between 1450 and 1644. Archaeologists believe the city was built right after the abandonment of yet another ancient city in the area, Great Zimbabwe. It was after Great Zimbabwe collapsed that the Kingdom of Butua first emerged. As they slowly grew in power, trading gold and cattle with civilizations as far away as Arabia and Portugal, they needed a stronghold for themselves. On a granite hilltop looking over the Kami River, they began building an enormous city that would last forever. And they succeeded. The complex had 7 main areas that were occupied by the local rulers, built above the rest of the city. In the open areas and valley beneath, there were clay houses for the subjects and peasants. In total, the site covered a whopping 266 acres. That made Kami one of the biggest urban centers in Africa at the time. It was around 1683 when Kami was finally destroyed beyond repair. The neighboring Rozwi people, led by Chengamire Dombo, were jealous of the wealth and power being amassed in Kami, So they invaded, killed everyone, and broke the city into pieces. And on that note, it's shout-out time! Want to give a big thank you to Patricia I and Azrael and Grandma. This might just be one of the cutest messages we've ever gotten. If you are new here, welcome, and be sure to subscribe to join the Origins Explained family. Elephant Cave. Goa Gajah, also called Elephant Cave, is an interesting and important archaeological site in Bali, Indonesia, located just 10 minutes from Ubud. The first thing you might notice about Goa Gajah is that its entrance is through the mouth of what looks like a demon. The facade of the cave, the natural rock outside, was carved centuries ago to represent the Hindu earth god Boma. Although to some, this carving is meant to represent the witch Rangda from Balinese mythology. Rangda was a witch who was known for eating children. Historians can't agree on which deity is represented here. Either way, you have to enter the cave through a gaping mouth. Much of Elephant Cave remains unexplored to this very day. The last excavation took place in the 1950s, discovering relics from before the 11th century. Nobody has any clue when exactly the cave started being used by people, nor even when the carving showed up, but it was at least 1,000 years ago. Goa Gajah was first mentioned in literature in 1365 in a Javanese poem. Archaeologists believe it may have been used initially as a sanctuary for Hindu priests. These priests likely carved the cave themselves by hand, then used it as a temple. Would you dare enter the witch's mouth to explore this ancient cave? Or have you already? Let me know in the comments. The Limes Arabicus. The Limes Arabicus wasn't exactly one single structure. It was more of a desert frontier, a line of defense at the edge of the Roman Empire to keep unwanted vermin out of their territory. At least that's the way the Romans would have thought of them. They built the Limes Arabicus along the border of the Roman province Arabia Petraea, separating Rome from Arabia. This was the furthest extent of Roman influence, at the edge of the desert in what is today Jordan on the Arabian Peninsula. It was the Nabatean kingdom who had the unfortunate luck of being the final civilization conquered by the Romans until they hit the desert. The Nabateans had been operating just fine out of their capital city of Petra as major traders until the Romans came along and squashed them. The Romans then built the Limes Arabicus as a way to control and survey the desert tribes beyond, making sure Rome maintained dominance in the region. Rome was so obsessed with holding on to what little part of Arabia they had that they began building new roads. These were to facilitate easier troop movement and the flow of commerce. This line of fortifications didn't do anything in the end. It was built up, and then troops were withdrawn in the first part of the 6th century. Rome was overrun in this part of the world by the Sasanians, and after the Muslim Arab conquest, the fortifications were all left to ruin. Nineveh. Nineveh is located in modern Iraq, but it was once the greatest city in the world. It was known as Ninua, a great center of trading settled 8,000 years ago. Ancient people lived here from 6000 BC until 3000 BC, when it grew from a settlement to a religious center and metropolitan capital. People here worshipped the goddess Ishtar, although this changed as kings and dynasties came and went. What makes this city so special is just how many people ruled over it. 8,000 years ago, there was a small group of Neolithic people living in Nineveh. They were there for about 2,000 years until the Hatti showed up, the same people who built their capital at Hattusa. Once they were gone, the Akkadians took over. This was sometime around 2334 BC, when Sargon the Great conquered all of Mesopotamia and destroyed everyone in his way. An earthquake in the year 2260 BC destroyed the Temple of Ishtar, which was likely constructed by Sargon himself. The Amorites occupied Nineveh for a while, then their construction projects were demolished when the Assyrian king Shamashi-Adad I chased them from the region. King Hammurabi of Babylon took the city around 1750 BC. Shortly after, the Assyrians regained control. This went on until the Battle of Nineveh in 627 AD. That was when the Byzantine Empire took over the city and brought the region under their control. But 10 years later, when the Muslim conquest began, Nineveh was destroyed and never occupied again. Ciudad Perdida. The only way to reach Ciudad Perdida, or the Lost City, is to hike for hours through the sweltering Colombian jungle and then climb 1,200 steps up the side of a mountain. This ancient city is almost impenetrable and remained hidden from the rest of the world in the forests of the Sierra Nevada up until the 1970s. It became one of the most important archaeological discoveries ever, like realizing there was a second Machu Picchu in plain sight that nobody had noticed. Speaking of Machu Picchu, Ciudad Perdida was built 650 years before, in 800 BC. It was home to a mysterious civilization of jungle dwellers, boasting around 8,000 inhabitants. What's truly fascinating is that it was built on a steep mountain ridge, roughly 1 mile above the ground below. And it wasn't like the ancient people just stacked up a bunch of rocks to build some stone hovels. They employed complex architectural knowledge. They built stone bridges linking various parts of the city, and even drainage systems to bring waste down the mountainside. No archaeologist has ever been able to confirm who lived here. The best guess is that it was the seat of power for the Tairona civilization. These people dominated the northern region of Colombia, but vanished around the time the Spaniards arrived in the 16th century. A mysterious cave. A team of explorers from the Indian National Trust for Art and Cultural Heritage recently visited an ancient cave near the small village of Narangar. The cave is a natural formation in the rock that was widened thousands of years ago by hand to create a cavern about 20 feet deep and 10 feet wide. Inside the cave, the researchers came upon strange inscriptions carved upon the walls. These inscriptions were of odd geometrical formations, animals, and strange human-like figures. And here's what makes the cave so fascinating. Researchers found tools dating back to the Stone Age inside, but have no idea who actually lived in the cave or how long human activity has been going on here. The cave was known only to the villagers living nearby. They say it was occupied by a hermit until 3 decades ago, when a landslide made it inaccessible. However, the artwork inside the cave and the stone tools suggest people lived inside it for thousands of years, back to prehistoric times. It was never part of any major settlement or city, but was probably just a cozy home for cave people to live in. It was then probably occupied by random hermits and Hindu holy men until the landslide made it too difficult to reach. Katna. Katna was first occupied in the 3rd millennium BC, but quickly became a thriving city in ancient Mesopotamia. It was positioned on an important crossroad between the Mediterranean, where places like classical Greece and Egypt were thriving, and Mesopotamia. This city reached its peak during the Bronze Age thanks to facilitating trade between people like the Egyptians and the Mitanni. It was too important to be destroyed by any of the larger powers because of its neutrality. It was a massive trading hub where all different people could meet and prosper. But with time, Katna became its own local kingdom. By 2000 BC, it was the capital of a regional power slowly spreading through the southern Levant. It continued to grow until it was sacked by the Hittites in the 14th century BC. After it was conquered for the first time, its strategic position wasn't so strategic anymore. It found itself in the middle of battle after battle, being beaten down, resettled, and passed from one ruler to another. All that finally ended when the Assyrians bombarded the city in 720 BC, reducing what was once a proud, self-governing kingdom to a tiny village of herders. Lizzie Borden's murder house. It's hard to say if the Lizzie Borden murder house is a place of mystery or just madness. The house is in Massachusetts, currently worth around $2 million, although a horrendous murder took place here. Do you know the famous poem about Lizzie? It was inside the walls of this very house where someone butchered Lizzie Borden's father and stepmother in August 1892. At Lizzie's trial in 1893, they acquitted her of killing her parents, yet they heavily suspected her for the rest of her life. To this day, we don't know who murdered Andrew and Abby Borden, and the house has taken on a life of its own. Some say the house is haunted, some say it's plagued by supernatural forces of evil, and others insist it's nothing but an old house made of ordinary wood and concrete. No matter your view, there is no disputing the fact that horrible and unexplainable things have happened here. Satan's Staircase. Stull Cemetery is believed to be one of the 7 gateways to hell. It's also been called America's most evil graveyard, shrouded in legends of ghosts, portals to the realm of Satan, and curses. This cemetery is so infamously mysterious that there is a rumor the Pope refused to let his plane fly directly over the grounds. It's even been featured in the show Supernatural. We can find Stull Cemetery in rural Kansas, originally built by Pennsylvania Dutch settlers who had left their homes in 1867 to escape religious persecution. They built an old stone church and began burying their bodies in the cemetery. But at the beginning of the 20th century, the roof of the church caved in, and they abandoned the whole place. Ever since, it's become the source of many terrible stories. It's said that on Halloween night, a stone staircase appears somewhere in the graveyard and descends deep into the depths of the underworld. The devil allegedly used this gateway himself to climb into the mortal world, revel for the night, and then drag spirits back down to his unholy sanctum. There are lots of other stories about witches, trees in the graveyard that were used for hangings, and even one story that's truly bizarre. Some claim Satan's very own child, a mutant born from a mortal woman with horrible deformities and hair like a wolf, is buried here, and that the devil visits the grave every year. Lake Anjikuni. Lake Anjikuni is in the Canadian territory of Nunavut. It's one of several lakes in the Kivalliq region, and on the outside looks like any ordinary body of water. It contains trout and pike, and you wouldn't think there is anything mysterious about the place by looking at it. But in November 1930, something happened here that can't be explained. It all began with a Canadian fur trapper named Joe LaBelle. He was traveling near the lake when he stopped at an Inuit settlement for a place to rest and to have a good meal. But when he entered the community, he discovered they had completely deserted it. He walked into people's huts to find them empty, yet with food prepped and sitting on the table as if they had just sat down to eat dinner when they vanished. There were fires still smoldering in the huts, everyone's possessions were still sitting in their homes, and there was no sign of any violence or struggle. Joe sat around for a while, thinking they must have gone out on some kind of expedition near the town, but they never returned. They left behind everything they owned, even their dogs. Joe found the dogs starving to death in their pens. There were no footprints leading out of the village. There was absolutely nothing. But here's the thing. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police investigated to see what had happened, and their search brought them to a trapper and his 2 sons. The trapper, named Armand Laurent, and his boys told the police that they had witnessed a massive cylindrical object in the sky heading toward the lake. They thought it looked an awful lot like a spaceship. Aside from their testimony, nobody else knew anything about it. They never found any bodies, and to this day, nobody knows what happened to the villagers. Avalon. Avalon was first mentioned in the History of the Kings of Britain, written by historian Geoffrey of Monmouth in 1136 AD. He described Avalon as an island located somewhere in the Mediterranean, a place occupied by wild apple trees, fruitful grapevines, and abundant with so much wild food that the locals didn't need to farm to eat. They described it as an idyllic paradise where the people had extremely long lifespans. They said the ruler of this mystical place was Morgan Le Fay, the sorcerer from the legends of King Arthur. Legend says that after they wounded King Arthur in battle, he retreated to Avalon to be healed by Morgan. Some legends say Arthur is still on the island today, waiting until Britain needs him the most to reappear. While we can obviously chalk a lot of this up to myth, Avalon may have been an actual place. One of the most popular options for the worldly location of Avalon is the ancient town of Glastonbury. Although it's not technically an island, marshlands once surrounded it, making it rather island-like. There was only a single entrance to the city, a boardwalk built across the marsh. Glastonbury was associated with plenty of old legends. Some say Joseph of Arimathea founded the Glastonbury Abbey, and Christ even once visited there. And in the year 1190, monks claimed they discovered the tombs of King Arthur and Guinevere, although it has never been proved. The Fairmont Banff Springs Hotel. The Fairmont Banff Springs Hotel is in what some consider the most beautiful place in the world. The giant hotel is right in the middle of Banff in Canada, surrounded by the Rocky Mountains and shrouded in a thick forest of pine trees. It originally opened in 1888, and ever since has been the source of great mystery. If the hotel didn't stand here, it would be a perfectly normal woodland. But for over 130 years, the hotel has accumulated its disturbing share of ghost stories and paranormal mysteries. The most famous mystery of all has to do with a ghost called the Bride, though keep in mind she's only one of many. Her story dates back to the early 1920s. On her wedding day, dressed in her white wedding gown, she slipped and fell down one of the marble staircases at the hotel. As she fell, her dress knocked over a candle, which resulted in her catching on fire. The stories are vague, but she either cracked her head on the stairs and died, or burned to death right there in the hotel. Ever since, staff and guests have seen a mysterious veiled figure moving along the stairs, and sometimes even dancing in the ballroom, still in her wedding dress. What's your favorite hotel ghost story? Let me know in the comments any mysterious experiences you've had while at a hotel. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. Somapura Mahavihara. Somapura Mahavihara is a mysterious Buddhist monastery in Bangladesh. It's one of the earliest Buddhist sites anywhere in the country, with a central courtyard surrounded by terraced superstructures rising over 70 feet into the air. The mystery here is that there was once something enormous in the courtyard, but nobody knows what it was. It may have been a central spire, similar to an ancient Egyptian obelisk. Others believe the courtyard contained a landing pad for an ancient spacecraft known as a Vimana. The entire complex was built over 1,200 years ago in the 8th century. The monastery walls are 20 feet thick in some places, with over 177 rooms in which Buddhist monks once lived. It resembled a fortress more than a monastery, designed a lot like a medieval keep. In the 11th century, the Vanga warriors from the Ganges Delta in the south raided the monastery and burned what they could to the ground. It was not discovered again until the 1800s. It's the center of the monastery that gets all the attention. There was once something huge standing here, but time has destroyed all traces of it. The weirdest theory is that of the Vimana, depicted in ancient Hindu artwork as a flying vehicle that looked like a mix between a blimp and a spacecraft. They have discovered no proof of these mysterious vehicles, but there are many who believe they were real and that this monastery had the landing pad in case one decided to visit. The Tonga Trench. Everyone's heard about the mysterious Mariana Trench, but nobody ever talks about the Tonga Trench. This is the second deepest place in the world, between Tonga and New Zealand. Its deepest point is horizon deep, 35,509 feet beneath the surface of the water. The difference between the Tonga Trench and the Mariana Trench is only about 300 feet, not a lot. But just what is it that makes this trench so mysterious? It's because we don't know what's inside of it. In June 2019, Victor Vescovo was the first man to descend to the bottom of Tonga Trench, but he wasn't on a fact-finding mission. He went down and then he came back up, documenting no creatures. The trench is so massive, so dark, and so unexplored, there could be anything down there. We just don't know what kind of deep-sea monsters are hiding over 30,000 feet in the darkness. The Bottomless Spring. The Fosse-Dion Spring in central France is bottomless. At least that's the way it looks. For centuries, experts have been trying to figure out where the waters of the bottomless spring came from, to absolutely no avail. The ancient people who lived here believed the spring was a portal to another world, or the lair of some mythical serpent king. Some said that if a person could swim to the very bottom of the pool, they would come out on the other side in a strange realm. And while that may not be true, many people have died trying. 2 divers lost their lives trying to figure out how deep the well is after getting lost in the narrow passageways beneath the surface. Since then, nobody has tried to go back to the bottom. It's sitting in the town of Tonnerre, surrounded by ancient walls blocking it off from the rest of the town. It's a surprising piece of history, and arguably one of the most mysterious places in all of France. This spring spits out 80 gallons a second, or 793 gallons a second in times of heavy rain. But to this day, nobody has any idea what feeds it. The Superstition Mountains. We can find the Superstition Mountains near Phoenix in Arizona. The mountain range is breathtaking, made up of deep canyons and beautiful volcanic peaks. It's a place of great natural beauty and also has a kind of spooky reputation. The mountain range has a history of hidden treasure, disappearances, and mystery. Stories of the Superstition Mountains go back to the 1800s and begins with the Mexican family by the name of Peralta. This family had gotten rich by mining in the mountains. According to the legend, during mining operations, the family stumbled upon a massive trove of treasure, a cavern filled to the brim with precious gold ore. Just after the Mexican War, there was only one member of the Peralta family left. Apache warriors had supposedly murdered the rest. They lost the location of the gold until 1912. That was around the time that the Apache took a man named Abraham Thorne to the treasure. Abraham was a doctor who had abandoned civilization to live with the tribe and offer them medical help for several years. To reward the doctor, the Apache took him to the site of the gold. He then enlisted the help of a German prospector named Jacob Waltz, and together they started extracting ore from the Dutchman's mine. But there is no physical proof any of this ever happened. It's all just anecdotal evidence passed down through stories. Almost everyone who's gone in search of the Dutchman's mine in the Superstition Mountains has wound up dead or vanished, and to this day, no one has found where the gold is hidden. Any ideas? Let me know in the comments below. The Eye in the Desert. The Eye of the Sahara looks like a strange alien landscape, or even like the place where an alien spaceship once touched down in the middle of the African desert. But the Eye, also called the Richat structure, is a mysterious geological formation resembling a massive bullseye. It stretches 24 miles across the desert and was only first photographed from above in the 1960s by the Gemini astronauts. Geologists thought the Eye was an impact crater made when some kind of space object smashed into the surface of the planet. But now, after years of study, we know it's a geological dome that collapsed. The formation contains rocks that are no less than 100 million years old. The Eye of the Sahara contains material that dates to before the presence of life on our planet. The mystery is how it came to be in the shape of a bullseye. Scientists' best guess is that volcanic activity lifted the surrounding landscape, creating a dome. Then, millions of years of wind and water ate away at the dome until it collapsed, creating an eye in the center of the desert. Many believe that this place was once home to a lost city, maybe even Atlantis. Thanks for watching! Which of these places would you like to see for yourself, or have you already? Let me know in the comments below, and remember to subscribe if you haven't already. See you soon! Bye!